Hi everyone, welcome to my video tutorial. This is Gayatri here for Taylored Expressions. I made this card using Taylored Expressions new liquid watercolors. This card came out so well and Taylor had requested me to do a video on it. So I am going to recreate this card for you in this tutorial. The supplies I used to make this card are the Big Bloom's Hydrangea stamp set, Aloha Script die and the backer die, Taylored Expressions Gold Foil Cardstock, Taylored Expressions Watercolor Cardstock. I have a 4 1/4 and 5 1/2 inch panel here which I'll be using. Taylored Expressions Heavyweight Vellum, a brush, distress sprayer, mini mister, Taylored Expressions Detailed White Embossing Powder, and the liquid watercolors, Peapod and Lemon Meringue for the leaves, Plum Punch, Lollipop and Guava for the hydrangeas. So let's start here. I'm using the smooth side of the watercolor panel and I have a craft mat on my desk. I add a very tiny amount of Guava, Lollipop and the Plum Punch liquid watercolor on the mat, and I'm spritzing it with water. So you can either use the mini mister with which you get very fine drops on it, or the distress sprayer where you get a big splatter effect. Now I'm going to smoosh just the top part of the panel onto the liquid watercolor. I have got a good watercolor wash. This is going to be my first layer and I am going to dry it with my heat gun. For my second layer, I smoosh on top of the first layer again to get a bit more of color vibrancy as well as a few spatters, and then I'm drying it again with the heat gun. For the third and final layer, I need a little bit more of the guava as well as a few more spatter on the top to get a bit more texture, and I am drying it again with the heat gun. I stopped with 3 layers, but if you want, you can add as many layers as you wish. I repeat the same process for the leaves using the lemon meringue and Peapod liquid watercolors. So I'm spritzing it with water, and then I'm going to smoosh the cardstock on the watercolor for the first layer, drying it and then smooshing it back again to get a second layer. For the leaves, I actually stopped with 2 layers and dried the entire panel with the heat gun. Now there are some hard edges towards the bottom of the panel. If you like hard edges, just leave them as it is, but if you don't, you can go in with a wet brush and smooth the hard edges out. Because watercolor reacts with water, you can go in with a wet brush like I am doing right now, and then add a bit of watercolor, and the watercolor reacts with the water and smooths out the edges. Then I am going to use the heat gun again and completely dry out the panel. This is very essential because I'm going to heat emboss the hydrangeas now. For this I'm using the original MISTI, and I am going to use the anti-static pouch to remove any static as well as oil that are on the panel. And this step is extremely important, and be generous because we have used a lot of water on the panel as well as a lot of handling the panel, so there will be oil stains as well as water. So make sure you completely dry the panel out as well as use the anti-static pouch generously over the panel. Now I am stamping the hydrangea on one side of the panel using VersaMark, and I'm double stamping it to get even coverage because it is watercolor paper. And using Taylored Expressions Detailed White Embossing Powder, I am going to white heat emboss this image. Then I'm stepping the hydrangea a second time over the other side of the panel, overlapping the first heat embossed image. After adding the embossing powder, I'm going to use a dry brush to brush off the embossing powder on the overlapped areas. So you don't need to mask the first image and stamp the other. You just need to use a dry brush and remove the embossing powder on the overlapped areas like I'm doing it right here. Then go ahead and use the heat gun to emboss the image. I am repeating the exact same process for the leaves as well. Stamping the leaves with VersaMark ink. Adding the Taylored Expressions detailed white embossing powder over it. Brushing off the embossing powder on the overlapped areas and heat setting it. I need a couple of more leaves, so the exact same process. Stamping 2 more leaves using VersaMark. Adding Taylored Expressions detailed white embossing powder. Brushing off the embossing powder on the overlapped areas and heat setting it with the heat gun. So now our stamping and heat embossing the images are complete, and I will be trimming the panel to 4 and 5/4 inch in size, which is slightly smaller than the card front. Coming to the watercoloring part, I'm using the same 3 colors of Plum Punch, Guava and Lollipop here on a palette, and I'll be using some water, mini mister and a brush. I've added 3 drops of the watercolor, which is actually quite plenty, and I am diluting the colors here by adding a little bit of water and then mixing the colors with the water. The first layer of shading is going to be a light wash of the colors, and the choice of colors are going to be determined by what is already on the background. So I'm adding here a diluted version of Guava onto the flower petals, and as the light wash dries, I come in with a bit more concentrated version of the same colors and add it to the inner corner near the center of each petal. Then I also come in later on to add other colors to add a little bit more shading and bring out the vibrancy. Okay, let me recap how I do my shading here. The first layer is going to be a light wash of whatever color is there on the background on each of the petal. Say if there is guava on the background, then I add a light diluted version of guava on each petal. If the background is pink, then I add a light wash of Lollipop liquid watercolor on each petal. And if the background is purple, then I add a light wash of Plum Punch on each of the petal. Now as this layer dries, I come in with a bit more concentrated version of the same color and add it to the inner corner of each of the petal. Since the paper is still damp, the water will do the work for you. The water will move the pigment from the inner corner of each of the petal towards the edge of each of the petal. So you get a gradient effect already. Now to intensify this effect, I come in with a third layer where I add a bit more concentrated of the same color or a different color. Say for example, if I have a petal with Lollipop already on it, then I come in with a tad bit of Plum punch and add it to the inner corner of each of the petal. And again, since the paper is already damp, the water will do the work for you and move the pigment from the inner corner towards the edge. So this adds a lot of vibrancy, layers as well as depth to each of the petal, making them pop out. So now I've completed both the hydrangeas. Moving on to the leaves, I do repeat the exact same process using lemon meringue and Peapod. I mix these two colors, dilute them and add a light wash initially, and then go in with a concentrated version of the two colors mixed. That will be my second layer, and the third layer will be a bit more darker color, that's just the Peapod, to add shading to the places where the leaves overlap with the flower or with a second leaf. So that's the leaves complete. I will be adding a little bit of green towards the outer areas of the leaves, because the leaves actually fall onto a stark white area of the panel. So I added a bit of water and used the diluted version of the two colors mixed around the leaves. And I dried the entire panel using the heat gun. You can leave it to dry, air dry as is, but for the sake of the video I use the heat gun to dry the entire panel. And now I'm going to add spatters on the panel. For the black spatter I used Taylored Expressions Oreo Liquid Watercolor, which I diluted a little bit using water. And similarly for the white I used the Copic Opaque White, diluting it with a little bit of water and spattering it all over the panel. I again used the heat gun to dry the entire panel for the sake of video, and I am going to now adhere the sentiment, which is made out of Aloha Script dye and the Aloha Script backer dye. And I didn't show you how I made this, because if I did, the video will be even more longer. And the focus here is on the watercolor, so I made the sentiment in advance, and I'm gluing it down to the bottom center of the panel. The card base is the black, which is the Oreo cardstock, which I'm scoring here. There is a little bit of opaque white on it, but that's alright because it's going to be covered by the panel, and I am adhering the panel using foam adhesive for added dimension. And finally, I'm going to use some sequins from Snow Flurry collection, which is from Taylored Expressions. And guys, this takes forever for me to find the right placement, so I have cut out a lot of the footage of me fiddling with the sequins, and here I adhere the sequins using multi-medium matte, and I will be topping the sequins with glossy accents so that they stay put if you are going to mail the card. So that will be the card finished. Hope you enjoyed my video tutorial. If so, please give me a thumbs up. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe. All the supplies I used to make this card are listed below in the description box. And for more details and close-up photos of the card, please check out the Taylored Expressions blog. Thanks so much for watching. Bye-bye.